So I will tell you that chapter 4 is a super long chapter. It is probably most students' least favorite chapter. It is on tissues. Tissues can be kind of boring, but they are the foundation of all of our organ systems. Because remember, if we take atoms and molecules and hook them together, we get cells. Cells make tissues. Tissues, more than one type of tissue makes an organ. So it is a sort of boring chapter, but it's a foundational chapter. And I will tell you that this lab is also kind of difficult working with tissues. So it is so important that as we go through these tissues that you really take good notes, that you pay attention to some of the characteristics of the tissues as I walk you through them, okay? So really what we're going to be working with today, there are 4 main kinds of tissues in the human body. There is epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is always a covering or a lining. So as a covering, it would be like your skin. And lining, it would be like lining the inside of your mouth, lining the inside of your digestive tract. And then also epithelial tissue, sorry, my dog and cat are fighting. Hey, stop. Stop. Sorry, this is embarrassing. Quit. Hang on. Sorry. Real life over here in the Pew house. The dog loves the cat. She's a puppy and the cat hates everybody. So the dog doesn't get it yet. All right, so epithelial tissue is a covering or a lining. But also, if you think about it, where you have glands of the body, like in your skin, remember you've got sweat glands, you've got oil glands, epithelial tissue is also going to make those, okay? The second kind of tissue we have is connective tissue. Connective tissue does exactly what it sounds like it does. It connects things together. So this would be things like connective tissue proper. And I know you don't know what that is. That would be like tendons. I'll try to write in here. Tendons and ligaments. That's connective tissue proper. Remember tendons, these are going to connect muscle to bone. So they're connecting things together. Ligaments connect bone to bone. We also have cartilage, we have bone, and we have blood, right? So all connective tissues connect things together. We also have another type of tissue is muscle tissue, and the 3 kinds of muscle tissue we'll walk through are skeletal, this connects to your skeleton, cardiac, this makes your heart, and smooth. Smooth muscle is found inside hollow organs of the body. So like it's found in the stomach, helping the stomach churn your food. It's found in your blood vessels, helping to move blood. And then the last type of tissue we'll walk through is nervous tissue. Okay, that's in your brain and spinal cord. So those are the 4 kinds of tissues that we are going to walk through in this chapter. Today, I'm going to try to get us through the first 2, epithelial and connective tissues. Okay. So remember, if we think of the levels of organization, we start with atoms and molecules, hook those up together to make cells. Cells working together make tissues. Okay, so tissues are groups of cells that are very similar in their structure and function. The cells have to work together, and a lot of times in our tissues, the type of cell in the tissue is very specialized for that tissue. Think about nervous tissue, for example. The type of cell in nervous tissue, one type of cell, is called a neuron, and neurons send signals. Well, that's a very specialized type of cell, but if we think about nervous tissue like the brain, its function is to send signals, right, and to communicate to different areas of the body. So the cells in our tissues are very specialized. So I just walked you through the 4 types of tissues in the body. So remember we have epithelial tissue. We have connective tissue. I'm just going to write CT up here. What tissue is involved in movement? That should be an easy one, right?
Muscle.
Muscle.
Yeah, muscle. And then I've got to move my things out of the way because I can't see, which I don't think I can move them out of the way. And then the very last one on the bottom, I think says control, but I can't read it. Is that what it says down there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
all right. Sorry, my tools for Zoom are down at the very bottom. All right, so that's nervous tissue. Okay, so those are the 4 tissues that we're walking through. Those are the just very general functions of those tissues. And then this is a great picture from your textbook. So this one basically just shows all 4 types of tissues and sort of how they're scattered throughout the body, right? Like nervous tissue, you can see at the very top, we've got our brain and spinal cord. Muscle, remember we have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, so that's found throughout the entire body. Epithelial, it's a covering or a lining, so like the skin, lining the inside of your intestines. And then connective tissues, we have lots of those. Those connect things together. They provide support. So this is going to be things like bones and tendons and fat, okay? So again, if we think back to those levels of organization, if we have tissues that are made of cells, then if we take some tissues and hook them together, at least 2 tissues make an organ, okay? So an organ has to have at least 2 types of tissue. That looks funky, doesn't it? There we go. But usually your organs have all 4 types of tissues. So let's think of, for example, stomach. Okay, your stomach is an organ. What kind of tissue would line the inside of your stomach? Which one's a covering or a lining?
Epithelial.
Yes, so epithelial lining the inside of the stomach, okay. Can your stomach move? Can it churn food? Yes. So what kind of muscle is found in your stomach? Skeletal, cardiac, or smooth?
Smooth.
Smooth. Smooth is in our hollow organs, right? So now we've got epithelial tissue, we've got smooth muscle. Can you feel your stomach? Like, can you feel when it's full or when it's empty? What kind of tissue would help with that?
Nervous.
Nervous tissue. So we've got 3 right there. Connective tissue is another one that's also in the stomach that's connecting all those things together. And so right there, that's just one example, but that's what we can do with almost every organ in the body, is we can walk through and we can talk about all 4 types of tissues in that organ. So for it to be classified as an organ, it has to have at least 2 tissues, right? Because 1 tissue is a tissue. So 2 tissues make an organ, but most organs have all 4 types of tissues. Now the term for studying tissues is called histology. So that ending ology means study of, and hist means tissue. So histology is the study of tissues. Now I want to explain this part to you because this is the part that makes histology so difficult. And that is, how are we studying these tissues? So what we do is typically we'll take a specimen, and a lot of times the specimen we're using is an organ, right? So it might be an organ from a human, it might be an organ from a rat or a cat or some other species. But we take an organ, and first we have to fix it, preserve it, so it doesn't break down. So we preserve the organ. And then a lot of times we'll dip it, this sounds weird, but it gets dipped in like parafilm, like the waxy stuff. You know, ladies, if you've ever had the hand treatments that are amazing, where you dip your hands in the wax, it's kind of like that. So they dip that organ in wax, and then they use what kind of looks like a deli meat slicer, and they slice that organ into really, really paper thin sections. And then they'll stain it so that certain structures pop a little bit better. So they'll stain it so you might be able to see the nuclei of the cells in that tissue a little bit better, or you might be able to see different kinds of fibers better. And then they mount it onto a slide. So they'll actually put it onto a slide, and glue a cover slip on top. And that's how we get a tissue slide, okay? So I'm gonna go back to the very beginning of what I told you. Remember, they're starting with an organ. How many tissues are typically in an organ? 4. So a lot of times when you are looking at histology slides, especially when we are in class, a lot of times I'll hand you a slide and it might say on there that you are looking at stratified squamous epithelial tissue. And you're going to put it under the microscope, and guess what? There's 3 different kinds of tissue under that slide because you're looking at an organ. You're not just looking at that one kind of tissue. And so it's always important to kind of keep that in mind. You also have to keep in mind when we're looking at slides that a lot of times what's used to stain the slide, maybe to stain the nuclei. Sometimes the stain they use, the nuclei are black. Sometimes they're pink. Sometimes they're blue. So it just depends on the stain. So you're never ever going to get 2 slides, 2 images that look identical. That is super important, especially when we talk about these tissues as we go through the lecture today and as you do the lab. There are no images in your lab manual that are going to match exactly with the images in your textbook. It's impossible to do that. I can't use those images, they're copyrighted, and there's no way I can never get a slide that's going to look exactly like what they used. And so just kind of keep that in mind, that it gets a little tricky because things might look a little bit different in terms of color, but if we always remember the overall structure and characteristics of our tissues, we should be able to identify them. Okay.